be aware of your audience, and then be aware um, that they have to relate to your story. And a good way to do that is just make the characters very believable. And then what you always want is original. And I wrote a blog about this once. Is the two things you must have in film if you really want it to just be real successful is originality and believability. And believability doesn't mean like realistic, like whatever. I mean, it can be as ridiculous like Star Wars, completely out there. But believability meaning like, it's relatable, the audience can buy into what is it saying, oh, okay, lightsaber, it's in the realm of possible. They can suspend their disbelief, in other words. So that's really important. But yeah, you have to have that, just giving a good way to do it is you need to have your characters developed enough where they can relate to it and relate to the situations they're in. And a good way to do it is give every character a want. What does this character want? And it doesn't have to be like the primary goal of the film, but just like simple wants, like I want this or that. And like, because there's some scenes I've written in my old scripts I used to write, which is ridiculous. Like, or some character A will just show up in the scene, and character B will be like, "What? Who are you?" And it just seems so abrupt. But if you give them want a purpose for being there, it just makes it seem more believable, and they're like, "Oh, okay." And that's what I kind of really had to work on in Deception. And once I wrote the bazillion drafts, like about 6, I can't remember. There's a lot of rewrites. Yeah, I think 6. Basically, yeah, I made sure that all the characters were there for a reason. They had purpose, they had a want, desire, even the secondary characters, and that just made it. I think that's what made it so successful when I showed it in the premiere, and everyone could relate to situations, characters, in because I was made sure to make the characters very believable and relatable, and I think that's what made Deception very successful. Because when you have, I mean, just the story. I mean, the story. The situations you're in, like being afraid, being, you don't know if you're truly safe. That's really relatable. And then the theme of someone turns out to be someone completely different. That's very relatable too. I mean, and just, I mean, even, I think even the secondary characters, excuse me, like the chief of police. I mean, they were really relatable too, because I think we had chief of police. What I wanted to convey, and I think Ted did, of course, a really good job, is that he has kids too. So when he sees other kids being murdered and stuff, it really, really disturbs him and bothers him. And he's the chief of police, so he's in charge of all the cops, everything, and it's just a huge job. And he has to find these kids. They're probably dead. He doesn't know if they're alive or whatever, and then he has to find this killer that they still haven't found. They've been looking for him for about 3-4 months, still haven't found him, and extremely, extremely, extremely stressful job. And he has to. Oh, and that's what I loved about that. Like, was it 50-second monologue piece he did when they go to his office in Deception? Is you got a sense of how hard of a job it was and how stressful it was. And it's just, I think that's what made it believable, is you didn't have to be a chief of police and know that it's a tough job, and you're just like, oh man. And he is a secondary character. I mean, he's an even major character, and he can feel the weight. Um, and I think that's what made that world come to life. And then just that story. That what I love about it is there's just so much you can use. Like, what I'd love to do is make it into a feature film with millions of dollars for a budget. Maybe have Tom Hanks in it, or someone famous. No, but no, I mean, it would be cool to do, because that way, now that I'm in film school, I'm going to the Academy of Art University in San Fran. Now that I know classical language, which is basically, all the rules, the 180-degree rule, and, like the shot composition, learning how to shoot, basically learning how to shoot the way they do in professional movies, so that way if you want to break the rules and shoot something more experimental, it won't look like crap. It'll look like you did it on purpose, you know. Kind of hard to explain, but it's basically all about human perception, how we perceive. That's classical language. Like we don't perceive a zoom, or when you pan, we don't look like this when we pan our heads. We find set shots. That's what my teacher, Mr. Rob, would say. So anyway, so yeah, I mean, I just love to do that, to make it with millions of dollars, because I made Deception for like literally no money. It was only a couple $100, and it's mainly just because I asked people who knew people who were like my friends or whatever. I'm like, hey, can you shoot here? Oh, sure, And I was kind of guerrilla when I did the auditions, because it wasn't technically, I had to fill out some elaborate formats to shoot an audition at CBC, and it was just like, oh my gosh, whatever. Probably could have shot it at the theater. I probably should have done that. Anyway, it just would be really cool to shoot it now, because I know the mistakes I made, and now that I have all this knowledge that I learned just from one semester going to Academy of Art, I'm like, I could really make it even better than it is, and it turned out really well. So that's just really cool, and then it'd be cool to bring back the old cast and crew, and I give them exposure to. Is help me help them, They win, I win. That would be cool. But there's just so much material. It's a 35-minute film, but it's always talked about in the film as this backstory. There's these murders that happen. Here's this killer guy who, killed, who worked with this partner who we don't know who he is. There's just so much backstory, and if you wanted to make it into a feature, you could totally expand upon it, make it like easily 2 hours, probably, or an hour and 30 minutes, and you could incorporate it. Like we could start when we make, if I make it into a feature, I could start where the killings start to happen. So right when the backstory is mentioned in the Deception, and then and then and then what you would do is, and then you could have the film start too when Luke and Mark first meet, and then you could have that, and that would be kind of cool. And then same with Amanda and her family, Amanda and Brad and their family. You could have, introduce them, when the killings start to take place, and that way you can get, and then the characters would even be even more developed, But I think for a 35-minute film, the characters are pretty well.